So I'm sure that most of you watching are aware of this new update, the 9.2.0 update that Behaviour is bringing to Dead by Daylight, which has some fairly controversial changes to say the least. A lot of other content creators and streamers have already spoken their opinions about this update, but I thought I'd throw my take into the mix. But I must say, I don't think it's going to be that much different. So if you've come here looking for an alternative take, other than the fact that this update is absolute ass, then you've come to the wrong place. Now, before I open up the patch notes and start looking at what they're actually doing, I want to say that I'm going to be focusing on the tunneling and the slugging changes in this video. I will be touching on other parts of the update, such as the Myers rework, which is something that I do want to talk about, but I am going to be focused on the changes to tunneling and slugging. To start off with, I'm going to be looking at the changes to slugging, because I believe it is the less significant out of the two sets of changes, or the primary changes that they have decided to go ahead with. Now, if we actually take a look at this screenshot from the patch notes, the first thing that it says is that if a survivor is left in the dying state for 90 seconds during a match, they gain the ability to pick themselves back up after recovering. Now, to me, all this seems like is that they're taking an action that you could do using a perk slot and making it base kit so you don't have to use that perk slot for it anymore. The perk I'm talking about obviously being Unbreakable, or maybe even No Mither to an extent. Not to mention that this duration of this ability to pick yourself up lasts the whole trial. Part of the reason why Unbreakable was so balanced and fair is because it could only be used once. Now, while I'm a killer main, I would say that I play a pretty good amount of Survivor. My pie chart is probably looking about the 60-40 range between killer and Survivor. And Unbreakable is a perk that I do tend to bring, maybe not in every build that I make, but I do tend to bring Unbreakable in quite a lot of cases. Now, of course, Unbreakable, alongside being able to pick yourself up, has the 30% bonus to recovery speed, which some may argue is the main use of Unbreakable nowadays in the builds that people run, rather than picking yourself up. But despite that, I still think that Unbreakable is fair, because even if they're using the 30% recovery speed and they're not actually going to get themselves up with the perk, then they still need somebody else to come and pick them up. But even if they do use it to pick themselves up in the trial, or they do bring it with the intention of picking themselves up in the trial, it can only be used once, and that's what makes Unbreakable so balanced. When I come against Unbreakable on Killer, I'm not mad, and when I use Unbreakable on Survivor, I don't feel like I'm doing anything unfair, because I do genuinely believe that Unbreakable, in its current state and the state it has been in, is a very balanced perk to have. But giving it as base kit in a trial so that perk slot is freed up for something else that could be used for healing speed, gen speed, another chase perk. And then the fact that it can be used more than once in a trial, it can be used as many times as you want to use it in a trial, it just seems quite unbalanced. Now, I know I seem quite passionate about this, considering at the start of the video I said that the slugging changes weren't as detrimental to the game as the tunneling changes. And I still 100% stand by that. I'm not a killer that slugs. I don't slug for pressure, I don't slug for the 4K. I very rarely find myself in a slugging situation. And I don't believe that slugging is this almighty strategy that always works, that's impossible to counter, even though I do find it annoying getting slugged when I play Survivor. As long as you have a coordinated team in front of you, slugging isn't that hard to counter. I don't personally slug myself because I don't feel like it benefits me all that much in most situations. But this is not to say that I completely agree with slugging. I do think that it can be, especially if you do it in a way like a basement bubba or something, then it can be a really cringe and really annoying strategy to pull, where you can put the survivors in an uncounterable situation. So yes, there are ways that you can be put into an uncounterable situation using slugging, but at the same time, I don't think that it required action to the level that they have done. I am all for an anti-slugging component to be implemented into the game, because I do think that it would help survivors in the situations like a basement bubba, where there isn't much you can do if you get slugged, you just kind of have to accept it. I just think there were so many more efficient and less drastic ways that they could have implemented an anti-slugging feature than this. Not to even mention that they're removing the button required to recover, and they're giving survivors base kit tenacity where they can crawl on the ground whilst recovering. The only thing that gets me more than anything is that they're giving this base kit, so they're removing the idea of bringing a perk to prevent this kind of thing, which means that a whole new perk slot has now been freed up for something else. So while I may not slug myself and a lot of other killers may not slug themselves, this will still affect us, because that means that nobody will bring a perk like that anymore. There isn't a perk needed to counter slugging, because there will already be this really strong way to counter it base kit. And that perk slot can be used for literally anything else. They could, as I said earlier, bring a chase perk, a gen perk, a healing speed perk, so it's just feeding into this meta of gen rushing. So whether you're a killer that slugs or not, chances are you are going to be affected by this change. But now let's move on to the tunnelling changes, and I genuinely cannot wrap my head around who thought this was a good idea. Now there is a lot to get through here, so I am going to try and group some things up, but the first thing that can only be spoken about on its own is the fact that the unhook notification is going to be disabled from the killer. Now, I don't tunnel either. I do not think that tunnelling is a viable strategy. I'm very against the idea of tunnelling somebody out in Dead by Daylight. I never do it. But disabling the loud noise notification that killers get from when someone gets unhooked is taking away such crucial and vital information for every killer. That loud noise notification not only tells you where at least one other survivor is, or two if you count the person being unhooked, but it also tells you that that is one less person on a gen. It can tell you a lot in a game about locations and where people are and what they're doing. It's such a killer fundamental for providing information that has been around for years, and they're just deciding to take it away now as a part of this anti-tunnelling measure. Now the next thing that I'm going to touch on really annoys me. The haste and endurance status effect and the no collision for the killer and the survivor isn't the end of the world, that's fine. And the new elusive status effect I think is even a good thing. But the immunity to killer instinct is absolutely ridiculous. That has never been a thing before. There has never been anything that makes you immune to killer instinct. Now on the whole I can see why this killer instinct might promote tunnelling, but this is the biggest fuck you to the Legion that I have ever seen. The Legion requires killer instinct in order to use its base power. Which, might I add, isn't even a power that promotes tunnelling at all. If anything, it promotes the opposite of tunnelling, splitting the pressure and splitting the chases among all survivors. So now, the poor Legion players are just going to be left to suffer, because if someone's recently been unhooked and they want to get into their frenzy so they can get their insta-down power right at the end, they're not going to be able to know where that recently unhooked survivor is, practically denying them from using their power to its full potential. Now, as of the time I'm recording this, the PTB has yet to come out. I'm recording this the day before the PTB comes out, and the thing that we do not have yet is numbers, which could really make or break this update. If this immunity to killer instinct is only really short form, then I can see it being less of a problem, but just basically saying that anyone is going to get immunity to killer instinct is enough to raise concerns. Going back to the patch notes now, this next thing that I'm going to be talking about is probably the biggest issue with this tunnelling reduction feature. Now I should mention between this, it does give the list of perks that the killers are going to get to try and make things more balanced, but I honestly don't think that there is any way that you can actually balance the suggestion that they have made for decentralizing tunnelling here. Giving bonus gen damage, temporary haste, and revealing survivors' auras like barbecue and chili is nothing compared to the perk that survivors are going to get now. Right at the bottom, it says if a survivor dies before 6 total hook states, all remaining survivors gain a repair speed bonus for the rest of the trial. This is utterly ridiculous. Like, this is laughable. Even though I'm relatively split between how much I play killer and survivor, I think that this change is absolutely ridiculous. To put it into perspective, 6 hook states is either 2 dead survivors or 2 people on death hook and the other 2 are hooked once. That isn't something that is pulled off in 100% of killer games. There are some occasions where somebody will die before half hook states. That's just the way the game is. And there are some killers that if gens are popping really fast, then sometimes you have to get somebody out of the game, because ultimately having 3 survivors instead of 4 is the best kind of pressure that you can get. In this game that's running right now, I had someone killed before there were 6 hook states. Does that mean I tunneled them out? No, of course it doesn't, because I wasn't actively going for them. This is also incredibly usable for survivors. They can really abuse this, because if there's somebody on death hook, they can just run at you and take every chase from you and try and get in the way in any way they can, and a killer might not always want to get them out of the game for the sake of this repair speed bonus. This whole update, both the tunnelling and the slugging changes, are both things that survivors can really abuse throughout the entire trial. Now I do think that there should be something implemented in the game to prevent slugging and tunnelling, because I don't think they're viable strategies. I think slugging can be acceptable, but not very often, and I avoid both personally, and I find both annoying when I play Survivor. But I don't think that the correct measure to go to is to put in something into the game which can be so easily abused by the survivors, where it can just make the killer have a really bad time playing the game. Not to mention, imagine you're a new player coming into the game, you haven't played Dead by Daylight before, or you've played it before but extremely little, and you have to wrap your head around all of this. It's making the game so complex. And while this isn't something that every killer is going to struggle with, the more experienced killers might have an easier time with being able to maintain all of this. I don't think it's a good idea to overcomplicate the game to this level for all the new killers out there. Now, I did say that I wanted to touch on Myers in this video, but now that I think about it, there isn't all that much that I can actually say until I've actually tried him out in the PTB, so I'm probably going to save that for another video. But on the whole, to summarise everything that's been said, I think that this update has the potential to kill the game for killers, or at least create such a backlash that Behaviour don't need right now. Behaviour were already facing a massive backlash before they even announced this PTB, and now this is just going to make things so much worse. But one thing that I do think it's important to stress is at the time that I'm recording this video, the one thing that we do not have is the PTB actually being out. We don't have numbers or figures. That could be a really big deciding factor as to how truly detrimental this update is. But on the whole, I don't think this is a good update. I don't think it's going to be a good update. I don't think they've gone about this the right way, and I hope that in its current state, it doesn't make it to the live release of the game. While I was editing this video, I realised that I forgot to mention one of the most annoying parts of this update, which is that if the survivor that was last hooked is sacrificed or killed, then gens can't be regressed or blocked. In my opinion, this is an absolutely awful change as well. This takes away a killer's only counter to the current gen rushing meta that there is in the game. Again, this is Behaviour trying to counter tunneling, but in doing so, they're just making the game so much harder and so much more annoying for killers. Although this makes the most sense to be an anti-tunnelling measure, it still is really badly implemented. Although we've seen meta shake-ups before, this isn't a meta shake-up. This isn't shaking up the meta of running DMS and pain res and other perks like that, gen regression perks. This is actively feeding into a meta that already exists on one side of the game, while seriously messing up the only counter that the other side have. Please, Behaviour, for the love of God, just listen to us this time, please.